Thank you all for joining us here today. My name's Jose Ruiz. I am the founder and co-music director of the Game Music Ensemble at UCLA. We focus primarily on the mission of spreading appreciation, adding relevance to video game music via performances in the concert hall, and ultimately doing events like this where we bring in composers, other industry professionals to talk a little bit about what it is behind the scenes. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest for our continuing Masterclass series. Tonight we have with us a composer from several games which are beloved in the industry, including Journey, Abzu, most recently the Pathless, games such as Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the Banner Saga, etc. The list just goes on and on. So I'd like to introduce you all to Austin Wintory. Thank you so much, Austin, for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure.
From your perspective, where would you say you are? You know, you've been intrinsically tied to the evolution of this medium as well.
My career, in my mind, began in 2006. That was sort of when I made this transition unwittingly and by good fortune, good luck more than anything, from kind of student projects to those first inklings of professional projects. And then of course the ultimate just random luck of those was my meeting Genova Chen and scoring the student version of his master's, scoring his master's thesis, which was the later to be revealed student version of the game Flow. It's funny because Journey felt like a midpoint in my, like I had already done a lot of feature films. I had done a couple, handful of student games and very small independent projects. And so Journey felt like, here's just kind of the next thing in line. And this one showing way more promise than most of these, it was just instantly very exciting. And from day one, I thought this looks like it's going to be different. Long and short of it, I kind of always feel like, I'm just now kind of cracking in who I want to be as a composer, who I want to be as a performer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every new thing kind of pushes me somewhere novel. So
I've often heard many composers say music is music, whether it's for video games, an advertisement, a jingle. Do you feel that way similarly as well, where you're just a composer first and foremost?
As it turns out, I really took to games because the whole aspect of interactive music and non-linear music design ended up being something I became wildly obsessed with. I do think I am somehow well aligned mentally for games. And part of it is that I've also just been a passionate gamer my whole life. So there was nothing sort of deliberate, but to the other kind of thread in what you said about kind of music is music, I heartily agree. I would come across some text that would refer to me as a game composer, and I always had this very kind of like, would you get rid of the whole game thing? Composers are composers, and I kind of got probably a little too precious about that for a while. Over the last few years, I don't feel nearly as strongly about that in a way. And in a sense, given my just overwhelming obsession with interactive music designs, I kind of bear the label game composer with a certain amount of pride, because I definitely feel, at least in my case, there is a fundamental difference between a composer who happens to write music for games and someone who considers themselves effectively a game designer who happens to be the music portion of the game design.
What has it been like working specifically in the video game industry? As I mentioned, it's been in vogue a little bit, talking about, the culture of crunch, for example.
Games are goddamn hard to make. They actively don't want to be made at every moment, and they go kicking and screaming into existence. So Sony at one point said, okay, look, we'll let you keep going, but we're not paying anymore. So that game company had to basically burn through their savings for the last however many months of development and just pay out of the coffers of the company to keep the thing. And by the time Genova has publicly spoken many times that when Journey launched, that game company was bankrupt. And if the game had been a failure, then they would have instantly vanished off the face of the earth.
We've had a number of questions about perhaps if you're willing to share how that process works for you creatively.
I would write and then rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and throw things out. I gave myself all kinds of, time to experiment and fail and try things that are terrible, and then other things that are less terrible. And it's fun to do a film in the mix of that, in order to kind of, it's sort of like you're training for a marathon and you occasionally do a sprint. Right. Where you just use your body, use your mind and your creativity in a very different way. Because a variation in a way of your question is, how long does it take to write a score? I get that asked a lot of me by producers when they first hire me. Okay, how long do you think you need? And I always think that question is very funny, because I'll basically say, I need however much time we have. In my initial experiments, I just thought, well, let's just try a bunch of stuff. I thought it might be interesting if it was sort of this percussion ensemble. And I don't know what made me think that. And so I wrote all this stuff where it was like a bunch of metallic clanging of just, and I remember Genova hated that. He was like, this just, the funny thing though, is his note was not, I don't like this because it's supposed to be young and playful and all that, which would have been a perfectly reasonable note. But he goes, when I hear percussion, I just picture a person playing percussion. I don't get immersed in the gameplay. It just like overrides my senses, and I just picture some dude standing there banging on stuff. And so there's very minimal percussion in that score in general, and it's kind of partially a byproduct of its fittingness, and partially because to him it was like this fourth wall breaking thing. I love when I'm dragged places I wouldn't go on my own because of some very arbitrary desires or taste on the part of the collaborators. Like the idea of percussion having this very peculiar phenomenon for the game developer, resulting in a marginalization of percussion in the overall approach to the music. I'm always looking to take things off the table, like start of Abzu. Okay, let's have, I like, 7 harps is very appealing. I like a very top heavy choir, no baritones or basses, and start like doing things and then taking the rest off the table. Okay, no brass of any kind, no traditional orchestral percussion. And just sort of gradually removing options for myself, knowing, okay, I got to figure out how to solve my music and sort of dramaturgical problems without relying on tropes. And the more challenging I can make it, the more excited I get.
If you're happy to share perhaps some of your specific workflow, maybe some tools that you use, if you have something you'd be willing to share with us on screen share as part of that compositional process.
I did open one of my sequences, if we want to get into it, from Pathless, one of the box
totally, yeah. That looks like Digital Performer to me.
It is indeed, yep. A lot of it, especially in a score like this, it's so much about these just applying layers of paint over and over and over, like an oil painting, where it's literally starting to push off the surface of the canvas. It's getting so thick. How do I make sure that everybody gets their moment? And so things like this, what you're seeing here, these sort of scherzo-y passages that are all just, the various wind soloists, for example, all the bass clarinet, alto flute, recorder, and then there's the nickel harpa and things. And so anyways, it's great fun. Actually a really good example of what I meant, where it's just kind of like endless layers of paint. Each constituent element is basically a finished piece on its own.
This next question, I do want it to be brief, primarily because it can be the longest question too. And I know it's a question that it's on a lot of people's minds, especially people joining us from the industry and some of our composition students, and anyone looking to get into video game scoring in general, or follow even in your footsteps. If you were to give them the elevator pitch of the single best takeaway you can give to them in the next minute or so for them to take with them, what would it be?
I always encourage people to be divisive. Don't be afraid to be overtly polarizing in your writing. Write music that you think there's a real chance that this will be hated. Because that's also going to open up the door for it to be just unabashedly loved. And that's a far better position to be in than, yeah, it's fine. I don't really remember it, but your survival instincts, especially early on, are going to be going, I don't know. You're only going to be hearing the half of your brain saying, they may not like this. In fact, they likely won't like this. And I can only say, you're right. That's true. That's probably a sign you're on the right track.
We're going to start with our Q&A section now. We were just talking about the path list, a question about how the different cultures influence the score.
I'm always hunting for interesting musical colors in general. And I was very keen on the nyckelharpa before beginning this score, which is a Swedish folk instrument.
Right.
And so I was excited by that. But then also a big part of the inspiration of the design of the hunter and her dynamic with the eagle came from the Mongolian falconry traditions. And so it got me thinking about throat singing. And then it became this, okay, well, I want them to be a very dominant part of this score and kind of an anchor, but it's also, I don't want it to be, Tuban music. And so then I was like, okay, well, what if I counterbalance that with, the nyckelharpa? And then it was, okay, well, I also really, I can sprinkle some Irish penny whistle. And then, there's some interesting, Central African and West African rhythms that I like here, and some very specific, and so before I knew it, I found myself obsessing over, I want this to sound like a kind of non-existent global folk band.
So let's say you have a crazy idea like using 7 harps. How do you convince your employer to let you do that?
Well, it's not about me convincing them. It's about the 7 harps convincing them. Yeah, so I make a mock-up that's hopefully relatively accurate, or in some cases, I just record it. Journey, that game company and Sony never once heard a cello solo mock-up ever. I always recorded Tina, even if the rest of the cue around her was a mock-up. Cello solos were always live because I thought a mock-up it's gonna not just fall short, it's gonna actively deceive you into what it is. In the case of the 7 harps, they were like, wow, that's cool. I didn't even tell them what it was. Here's the literal conductor score. Like, here's the finale of Abzu. You can see harp 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as our outsized middle portion of the orchestra with our winds and our strings below. So it is verbatim exactly that.
Wow.
What's a style of game that you haven't composed for yet that you would really like to, that you'd like jump at the opportunity to compose for?
I've been lucky that a lot of the games that my reputation rests on are kind of genre defying, and that I discovered from that a great passion for that. So my truest answer would be the games that most excite me are the ones that I won't see them coming or have any ability to predict their existence until they are shown to me.
Which instrument do you find that is the most underrated instrument and that we should explore more?
Bassoons, violas, anybody that is kind of consistently given a subsidiary part, it often turns out to be a really beautiful place to lean. I'm also a big fan of writing instruments in their extreme ranges. Like, I love the bottom fifth of the piccolo, for example, which, you hear it very rarely because it's impossible to hear unless there's literally no one else playing. And so anything like that.
I'm interested in both composing for an educational perspective for like high school and middle school, but also I've always been interested in the video game side of things. But I really don't know how to transfer a lot of my educational composition skills to the video game or media music setting.
I relish the idea of, okay, who says, like, what if it's for first graders? Can you write a compelling piece of music that relies entirely on the, 0 subdivisions of a quarter note pulse? I actually find myself thrilled at the prospect of that challenge, saying, okay, let's see. Because I tell myself, somewhere on the planet, there's a brilliant composer that will write an incredible piece of music under these conditions. And so there's nothing that's preventing me from doing it other than a failure of imagination. Someone somewhere can, and probably has, if it's literally about the pragmatics of how do I write for this medium versus this other medium. All I can say is I did not know how to score games until I started scoring games. And you will never learn anything like you will by just convincing somebody that you know how to do it, whether you feel you do or not, and then just figuring it out when the heat is on. Referring to that scene in Independence Day where they go, okay, here's the plan. We're going to take this 60-year-old crashed spaceship. We're going to fly it up to which we've never flown. We're going to fly it up to the mothership. We're going to plant a computer virus that's going to disable the shield. We're going to plant a nuke, blow up the ship, and come home. And everyone goes, okay, cool. And then when they leave, the two of them are standing there and he goes, do you think you can actually do any of that shit that you just said? Can you do any of the shit that you just said? And it's like, well, I guess we better. And I was like, that scene is basically my career. It is. I have led my whole life saying, oh, it's amazing. We're going to have 7 harps. And we're going to have choir, and that's like, then the door closes and I go, oh, fuck, I have to do that, don't I? It wasn't just a fun meeting. The summary, the note that we can end this on, that so much of my worldview is all about is just do it. I met Genova Chen and got hired to do Flow as a student because I sat next to a guy at a concert who looked out of place. It was a choral concert and this guy looked like G.I. Joe. And the super like buzz cut, it's all muscular. It's like, what are you doing at our cheesy, there's no audience members for a concert like this. Why are you here? And get talking to this guy. Turns out he was in the game design program at USC. I didn't even know that existed. And so I'm all excited, like, oh my God, well, I'm a composer. If you ever need music, blah, blah, and we got along great. I did his little student films. Then he recommended me to Genova. My entire life would be different if I hadn't talked to that stranger at a concert. And I was just fascinated that this guy looked so out of place that he was sitting all alone, and I went and was the awkward dude to sit next to him in a sea of empty seats. I'm the guy that's annoying on airplanes. That's like, what do you do? Where are you from? Because I've met lifelong friends that way. Everything can be boiled down to there aren't as many obstacles as you think to doing just about anything that interests you, even if it's the baby step version of it. Just do it. The worst case scenario of putting yourself out there is that no one will see it. And if it sucks, that's the best case scenario. So you're fine. That being not noticed is the default position.